I'm the storyteller, and my stories must be told. I have many stories, tales for both the young and old. I have many voices to describe many places. Many names have I, and many faces. In Russia I am Ivan, in Sweden I am Jan. In Germany I'm Johann, in America I'm John. From my many travels I have gathered these tales to teach you good sense when all else fails. Sometimes there are tears, sometimes there is laughter, but always are happily ever after.
Long ago, and far away, in the land of the long white cloud, there stood a great lake. The lake was very deep and very wide, and in the middle of it was a lush green island. On the shores of the lake there stood a busy, bustling village. The compound was always full of bright, laughing children. Everyone had enough to eat, and the people were content. One of the happy young people who lived in the village was Hinemoa, the daughter of the chief. She was very beautiful, and all the young men from the villages around were in love with her and wanted to marry her. They would make daily visits, hoping they might find favor in her eyes. But Hinemoa had eyes for only one young man, her beloved Tutanakai, who came from the island on the lake. The young couple loved each other dearly, which made all the other young men jealous. Now, Hinemoa's father, the chief, was a very strong and brave man, and normally quite good-natured. But one thing made him very cross. He did not approve of his daughter's love for Tutanakai. He did not dislike the young man personally, but he wished his beloved daughter to marry the son of a chief. Someone important. Tutanakai was not a chief, and that just wasn't good enough for his daughter. At first, nothing was said, for he hoped that his daughter's love might fade with time. But time went by, and still Tutanakai came visiting Hinemoa. When the chief saw how serious their love was becoming, he decided that the time had come to put a stop to it. He called Hinemoa over to him. He told her he did not approve of Tutanakai. But father, I love him with all my heart. He is not worthy. With that, he told Tutanakai to leave the village immediately. Poor Tutanakai did not understand how he had offended the chief, but for Hinemoa's sake, he left. Hinemoa was very upset. When she saw how her father disliked Tutanakai, she feared for his safety. She must get a message to him. She hurried over to one of the young men of the village. Please, go to Tutanakai. Tell him it's too dangerous for him to visit me. I will find a way to come to his island. The young man was reluctant, for he feared the chief's wrath, but he was also in love with Hinemoa. So in the end, he agreed. Away he went, leaving Hinemoa feeling a little happier. She knew that if only she could get to Tutanakai's island, they would be able to marry, for her father had no power there. the young man took his canoe and paddled out to sea to Tanakai. He gave him Hinemoa's message. He told him how the chief was very angry and how Hinemoa would try and join him on the island. Tanakai, in return, promised to go to the cliff top each evening and there sound his horn, so that Hinemoa would know that he too was waiting for her. This Tanakai did, and Hinemoa heard the signal in the village, and it made her heart leap. The chief had also heard the signal, and he was no fool. He knew Hinemoa would try to join Tanakai. He would have to stop her. He decided that the only way to prevent Hinemoa from escaping was to forbid anyone from his village to go to the island, and forbid anyone from the island to enter the village. He called one of his men and said, "Make sure the beach is guarded day and night. Let no one go to the island, and let no islander come here." The man hurried away to carry out the chief's order, leaving the chief feeling in a slightly better humour, though still very grumpy because of his troublesome daughter. The next day, as Hinemoa sat sadly wondering how she would ever be reunited with Tanakai, who should pass by but her father? He called her over. "Listen to me, daughter. I forbid you to visit the island until you have married a chief's son. The beach is guarded, so do not try and escape." Then he dismissed her. Poor Hinemoa was dreadfully unhappy. How could her father be so cruel? Why did he treat her like this? She loved Tanakai. He was a good man. He had done nothing wrong, just because he wasn't an important person. Really, it was too unfair. Day after day, Hinemoa would go sadly down to the beach, and there she would wait. She would sit and listen for the sound of Tanakai's horn, and when she heard it, she would feel a little happier, knowing that he too was waiting. And she grew more determined than ever to reach the island. Time passed very slowly for Hinemoa. She refused to look at any of the suitors her father invited to the village. Indeed, she and her father hardly spoke at all anymore, and where there had once been fond love, there was now only great coolness between them. Hinemoa changed from the bright, laughing girl who'd once been the life of the village. Nowadays, she would sit silently with a sad, faraway look in her eyes, for her heart was too heavy to have any fun. All she could think about was how she was going to reach the island and to Tanakai. The villagers began to notice that Hinemoa was avoiding her father. Whenever she saw him coming, she would hurry away. This saddened them, for they loved both their chief and his beautiful daughter. They knew the chief would not change his mind and allow Hinemoa to marry Tanakai, for any sign of him wavering would have been thought a sign of weakness. Hinemoa was still a dutiful daughter, though, and whenever her father was training his warriors, she would stand waiting patiently for him, holding his cloak. She desperately tried to think of a plan for reaching the island. However hard her father tried, he could not make her marry someone she did not love. No, Tanakai was the only person she wished to share her life with. Of that she was quite sure. Perhaps if she could distract the guards in some way. There were always canoes on the beach. She could take one and try and escape. If she was caught, her father would punish her harshly. But she no longer cared. So the next day, Hinemoa made her way down to the beach. She walked over to where the guards were sitting. They were so used to seeing her there, they were not at all surprised or suspicious. Hinemoa chatted away to them, trying to find out when they went to eat and when they slept. As she talked, she glanced casually round at the canoe. But to her dismay, she saw there were no paddles. There was nothing Hinemoa could do. Her canoe was no good without paddles. This made her more determined than ever to escape. She immediately had another plan. She had seen some children playing in the water, and it had given her an idea. She collected up some gourds, and each day she hid a couple of them in the rushes. Now these gourds floated in water, and with them she hoped to make a raft. It was a very long swim to the island, and she would use the raft to rest on when she grew tired. As she worked away, stringing up the gourds together, she decided she would make her escape the next evening. She heard the sound of the guards walking down the beach. She got up and came out from the rushes. The guards were surprised by Hinemoa and stopped to ask her what she was doing and why she was in such a hurry. Hinemoa just laughed and said she'd been playing hide-and-seek with the children. So they walked away. They thought Hinemoa was a little jumpy, but then everyone knew she was in love. The next afternoon, Hinemoa played with the children, and then she made her way out of the compound, smiling to the guards as she went. They were quite used to seeing her and suspected nothing. Night was falling, and far away on the island, Tanakai was blowing his horn. When she heard it, it gave Hinemoa the courage to go on. Hinemoa crept along the beach, keeping close to the rushes. She waited very nervously for the guards to pass. Once they'd turned the corner, that was her chance to escape. She hurried into the rushes where she'd hidden the raft of gourds. Taking off her overdress, she quickly picked up the raft, and hesitating only a moment, she walked out into the cold, dark lake. She shivered a little, but walked bravely on until it was deep enough for her to swim. Hinemoa was being very brave to swim out to the island, for not only was it a very long way away, but everyone knew that the lake was inhabited by a monster called Tanawa, who lived in its rocky depths, and no one ever went out too far except in a canoe. Although Hinemoa was very frightened, she swam on and on, further and further out into the lake, leaving the beach and the village behind her. With the sound of Tutanakai's horn to guide her, Hinemoa continued to swim strongly for some time. But at last she began to tire. Oh, the water was very cold, and she found it hard to keep going. She rested on her raft of gourds. It kept her afloat as she tried to regain her strength. Again the sound of Tutanakai's horn called her on, and she began to swim once more. Tutanakai was beginning to fear that Hinemoa would never find a way to join him on the island. He'd heard no word of her for so long. He would come to the cliff each evening to blow his horn until the day he died, but he was beginning to lose hope of ever seeing Hinemoa again, and in great sorrow he returned to his village. When the sound of the horn no longer boomed through the dark night, poor Hinemoa felt real despair, for it was her only guide. She thought sadly to herself, "Oh, I shall never reach the island. I cannot go on. I will die here in the lake." Just then, she saw something in the water, and a voice cried out, "Fear me not. It is I, Tanawa, the goddess of the lake. I shall make your strength return." And to Hinemoa's amazement, her strength did return, and she was able to swim even more strongly than before. Guided by Tanawa, she at last came to the island. Hinemoa was exhausted, but she knew that she must find Tutanakai as soon as possible, for her father would miss her soon and send out a search party. So away she went, up the rocks. Day broke over the island. It was a strange place, very different from the countryside around Hinemoa's village. Here among the green trees were great white rocks, which hid in their depths hot, bubbling pools. Steam rose from cracks and holes in the ground. Hinemoa was badly chilled from her long swim in the cold lake. She found herself being warmed by the billowing white steam. On she walked through the steam until she felt the numbness leave her bones. She still felt a little frightened, for she could find no village, and everywhere she looked, she saw twisted trees and bubbling mud. She had no further need for the gourds, so she threw them away. Oh, how she wished she could find Tutanakai, for she was so tired and hungry and also rather scared. At last, she could go no further. She was so tired she decided she must sleep. She would wait until Tutanakai blew his horn that evening, and then she would know where to find him. She settled down under a bush, and curling up, it wasn't long before she was fast asleep. That evening, Tutanakai faithfully made his way to the cliff. He was sadly blowing his horn when who should come swimming up to the rocks but Hinemoa. She'd heard him playing and followed the sound of the waterfall. Titanikai did not see her at first, for his thoughts were far away in the village by the lake. But as she climbed up towards him, he looked down and saw her. He couldn't believe it. Was he dreaming? No! It was his own true love. Titanikai was overjoyed. At last Hinemoa had come. Hinemoa too was so happy to be reunited again with her beloved Titanikai. Titanikai took Hinemoa back to his village, and the next day he showed her the island. They were so happy to be together again after the many months of loneliness. Titanikai and his village were greatly awed when they heard the story of how Hinemoa had reached the island. When the chief heard what Hinemoa had done, how she had braved not only the long swim, but the terror of the great lake monster, he too could not help but be proud of his courageous daughter. So he forgave her disobedience and attended her wedding. Titanikai and Hinemoa married and lived very happily together. Nothing ever separated them again. And this story of the beautiful Hinemoa and her beloved Titanikai has become legend.